Okay, so you just got out of one meeting and here you are in the next.
Yeah.
I was telling Roman this is my third meeting of the morning also, so I'm kind of about done with Zoom meetings for the day.
Nice. Yeah.
So where are you calling from? Are you in New York or?
Yes, I am calling from the Mecca of Harlem, New York.
Oh, okay, great, cool. Well, we're really happy to have you with us today. I've been so excited about this. The articles that you shared with us were just to me so compelling, and the work you're doing and the way you're thinking about things, and trying to push things forward in some new directions is all just so exciting. So thank you so much for being here. You're kind of you're our last guest, and in some ways, we kind of saved the best for last. So thank you so much for joining us. Although we've had lots of great people, I have to say. But I got into this at the beginning of the semester, and I was like, really, you want me to do this? How am I going to figure out how to set all this up and everything? But it's ended up being this wonderful opportunity to meet people all around the country like you that are doing all these amazing things. And I was just telling my students I've been trying to include as many African Americans as possible, so that there was a little more reflection of kind of their culture and where their background and so forth, so that there was a little more connection to, okay, there's a way forward here. There are avenues and pathways that I could pursue, and that's a big part of why we did this course. But I was also explaining to them that that's the way that I designed their final paper, which they'll be starting on, which is to kind of go through all the 12 or 13 guests and catalog kind of key learning things that they feel like they've learned that are kind of like life lessons or whatever, to kind of take away things that they feel like they could apply to their own process that they're in. Martrell, that you see there, thank you for having your video on. Appreciate that.
Seriously, thank you. It means a lot that you have your camera on.
You're welcome.
So he was saying, yeah, most of the folks in this class are seniors. There's a couple who are not, but everybody's kind of like, okay, what's going to be next? Kind of like, how am I going to sort of navigate this and find some stepping stones along the way? So again, thank you for joining us and sharing your story with us. Just for those of you who have not had a chance to look at all the amazing materials that Sarah's shared with us. By the way, how do you say your last name? Is it Zewde or Zewde?
Zewde, like Zodiac, without the act.
Cool. I've been saying it wrong, so I'm glad I asked. So Sara Zewde has her own firm in Harlem, and she has a pretty amazing record of things that she's done in the past, including bachelor's of sociology and statistics from Boston, which is just right there. That one thing is like statistics. Oh my God, that was the bane of my existence in grad school. Someone would choose that. It's like, wow, okay. So you must be really good at math, among other things, or conceptualization.
I'm not good at it. That's why I studied it.
And then you also have, I see, 2 master's degrees, one from MIT in city planning. Is that the first one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then to even get more down into the weeds, you have a master's degree in landscape architecture from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. And we've had the pleasure of talking with 2 or 3 folks who are connected to that program, some of whom are kind of on the full faculty, track, and others who are more adjunct. And I guess, have you taught there as adjunct, or is it just where you went to school? Or
I'm on the faculty there. I'm on the.
We are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're part of that. Plus, you've also been, you've been doing some teaching down with Diane Jones Allen at University of Texas.
I was at Austin. She's at Austin.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, we had the pleasure of talking with Diane because she was, the ringleader of that amazing twin pandemics article in the Landscape
Yes.
Architecture magazine. So we've been tapping into that as a major resource and a source of inspiration. So, yeah. And then I see also you did some teaching at Columbia where you got your undergraduate, I guess, right?
No, I just happened to teach at Columbia.
Oh, that was right, Boston University, right. So the GSAPP, that's a lot. It's a graduate school of architecture, planning, and
And preservation.
preservation. Okay. And I see also because one of your many awards has to do with the Historic Preservation National Trust, that you, in addition to being an artist and an urbanist and a landscape architect, among other things, you also must have some fairly keen interest in sort of historic preservation issues. And for instance, just to give you a little context, a couple of weeks ago, we spent the morning with Kofi Boone, who's written several amazing articles about the importance of historic preservation of Black landscapes and kind of what is that and what does that look like and how do we even begin to think about that. So we've had a little bit of, contextualizing of that issue, which we'd love to hear your take on all that. So this morning, what we'd like to do is just invite you to kind of share your own journey, whatever you feel you want to share in terms of sort of your personal journey, especially kind of like maybe like where you grew up and where you went to high school, and then kind of your sort of general path through MIT or Boston, and then what was the other ones? MIT and Harvard. So that all sounds very interesting. We'd love to hear, especially kind of like some of your experience that kind of led you towards that path and some of the ways that that's played out. So we'll turn the floor over to you. I'm going to change this so that, there we go. Now we can see you a little better. So please share your story with us, Sarah.
Sure, and I'm happy to do that. I'm curious though. I guess Martrell is the one student that has his camera on. Otherwise, I'd ask the others too. If you maybe could tell me a little bit first about you and yourself, and then I can maybe highlight the parts of my own biography that are resonant. Martrell, do you mind sharing a little bit about you and where you're from and how you chose landscape architecture?
Yeah, I can do that. So I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina, small city, North Carolina. I guess I kind of got into like landscape architecture because as a kid, I always wanted to design like my own water park or like have my own roller coaster. And I guess I never realized it because I was going to come to school for either architecture or business. But my cousin told me not to go to school for business. So A&T had landscape architecture, so I tried it. And then I guess it clicked. That's kind of what I always wanted to do since I wanted to design water parks, and I grew up playing Sims, building houses, and
Yep, me too.
just
Well,
so that's kind of how I got into it.
Carl and I were just having a conversation about how could he get a job at Disney? Like what? Like how could we make some kind of connection to that? I was going to call the folks down at University of Florida and see, like, do you know anyone?
I had a former professor that worked at Disney. I could email her.
Cool. That would be excellent. Well, we were just brainstorming a few minutes ago.
So funny. Does anybody else that doesn't have their camera on want to share? I'm curious, just like who am I talking to and where are y'all from?
I can go.
Do you mind turning on your camera, David, if you have one?
I do not have one.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. So my name is David. I am a military brat, so I don't really have a place where I grew up. And I've always liked the outdoors, so that's kind of what made me want to become, at least get in the green industry itself. I got an associate's in landscape gardening
Hmm,
down in Sand Hills, which is in Pinehurst. And after interning at a nursery, I realized I didn't want to be outside 100% of the time in a greenhouse. So, and I really enjoyed the design. Like, we had 2 classes for like designing. So I wanted to continue that.
great. Is there a place out of all the places you spent time that you kind of feel more inclined towards?
Not really. Like, I kind of stayed there for like North Carolina's my longest stay.
Okay.
Right. I typically I've been to Texas twice, been to Hawaii, but those are like 3 years each.
Wow, you really have been all over the place, which is good for a landscape architect, actually. I think that's useful. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Jasmine. Um, hmm. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. I kind of just ended up here. When I was applying to go to school, literally every place that I applied for something different.
Hmm.
And then once I started getting my acceptance letters back, I based it on how close or how far I would be from home so that I would still be able to go back and take care of the things that I need to. So once I arrived at A&T, I didn't know what what I was getting into, but I know everything that I started to apply for was something within the arts, and I would be okay with that either way. And since I got here, I loved it. So I think it worked
Yeah,
out great.
great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Cedric, Roman?
Hold on, I'm coming. Here I come.
Hey, Quan, you got your mic on.
Boom,
Hey, there
boom,
you
boom.
go. How you
What's
doing?
up?
Can you,
So I'm
you,
from
go ahead.
I'm sorry, what's up?
Please go ahead.
So what's up? I'm Cedric McGriff. I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida, but I moved to Charlotte and oh yeah, and Charles right here. I'm originally from Jacksonville. I moved to Charlotte and like in middle school, at the end of middle school. I took a horticulture class in the 9th grade,
Huh.
and that like and then from there I was like, all right, I'll just try it. And then once I tried it, I signed up the next year, and I signed up again. And then
They
like
had horticulture in your high school?
hmm my senior year, yeah, we had a greenhouse and everything. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
Then my senior year, I was in like the advanced studies class, and I was like, I definitely want to continue like this outside work. So then I came here, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think my major when I first came was something else. I think it was like, I don't even remember. But then I was like, landscape architecture sounds closer. And then start taking these classes. But it's like having the speakers here has shown me a lot of different routes. So I'm still like trying to figure it out. But I definitely, this is what I like doing.
Well, you got lucky that you ended up at NCA&T because basically there's
hmm
not a lot of schools that would have been able to offer you landscape architecture. So
Yeah, and it's
you
crazy because
got
I
lucky
run
that you
track
chose.
here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I was actually going to go to some other schools, but then like nobody else had the majors. And then I was looking in here and I seen that they had more things that I liked, so I came here.
Well, you were ahead of where I was when I was in college. All of you are actually, because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I honestly like, okay, yes, I'm faculty at Harvard. I have my own firm, but I frankly did not know landscape architecture even existed until relatively recently. I'm from Slidell, Louisiana, and I grew up half in Slidell, which is kind of a small town between New Orleans and the Mississippi state line. And then when I was like 12 or 13, we moved to Houston, Texas. So half in a small town, half in a big city. But I'm honestly a country girl at heart. And then I went to college not knowing what I wanted to do. You know, people say like, just go to college and you figure it out there. And so I went, and in the first week of my sophomore year, Hurricane Katrina happened. And it was really that, watching that on the news from my college dorm, that really made me ask myself, what could I study that would really allow me to insert myself into this and be an active participant in what happens after Katrina. Like, I started to go to community meetings before I knew I wanted to do architecture or urban planning, and when I was at those meetings, I could see the kind of gap between people, just like regular people, and the people that were trained to be planners and architects. And so I just started to say, you know, what are the different majors that that I could take that would help me be productive after, you know, after Katrina. So I researched all my options, and I was like, I got it. I want to be an architect or a landscape architect. And I went to the registrar's office, and they were like, we don't have architecture or landscape architecture. So that's how I ended up doing sociology and statistics, because I thought, okay, if I can't design it, at least maybe I can gain skills in how to understand places. So I did that, and then I thought, okay, let me do a Master of City Planning. I thought I didn't have a portfolio strong enough to get into an MArch or an MLA program, which is why I did a Master of City Planning, because you don't need a portfolio. So I did a Master of City Planning, and I worked as a city planner, but I still felt like this isn't like, urban planning is a lot more about writing and policy, and you know, and I felt like the creative side and the part about being outside, just wasn't really fulfilling my interest in being able to really design and shape a place just as an urban planner. So I was like, okay, let me go back to school one more time. And I went back to school one more time, and that's how I ended up doing the Master of Landscape Architecture. And honestly, now that I'm a landscape architect, I feel like I took a long journey to get here, but it is exactly the field that I wanted to be in back when Katrina happened. So you know, I worked at, or I after my first year in the MLA program, I did a summer internship with your famous alum, Walter Hood.
Wow.
And yeah, I went to go work for him for a summer, and I loved it so much I didn't come back to school for a while, and I just stayed in Oakland and worked for him. And the reason I did that was because his work was so relevant to me, and to feeling like, okay, there's a way for my experiences and approach to the work that is relevant to the world. And not only are they talking about it, but they're building it. Like, I really want to build landscapes. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to, I mean, I like talking about them too, but ultimately, if we're not building things, for me, it's like that's where the rubber hits the road, and Walter was building them. So I really liked that about his office. Finally, I come back to Harvard, and I finish my degree, and I start working for Catherine Gustafson. I don't know if you guys have studied the work of Catherine Gustafson at all.
Not yet,
No, not
but
yet.
sounds like we should.
Yes, yes, yes. She's done she did the Laurie Garden in Chicago. She did the memorial to Princess Diana in London. They have a lot of really beautiful sculptural work, um, and they're really good with plants as well. But what I really liked about their office was their attention to detail. And so they really worked with concept and narrative really well, but then they brought all the ideas about concepts into the design work. So there was no, for instance, there's no detail library in the office, because they feel like no detail should be done twice the same. They
Whoa.
should always be inspired and shaped by the goals of the project. And so I really learned a lot about detailing and project management from working there. And then basically what happened was, I was working an average of 70 hours a week for this office while at the same time moonlighting and doing my own independent project. And I basically hit a wall, and I couldn't keep going. And at the time, if you had asked me, you know, how long are you going to work at this firm, I probably would have said another 10 years, or I don't know. I had no plan to start my own firm. But basically, I was managing a project in Nigeria. It was a U.S. consulate in Nigeria, and so I was traveling a lot. And I came back from Nigeria one day, and I had to go to work the next day, and I was so tired, and so I just hit the wall. I just hit a wall. I didn't see the wall coming. I just opened my eyes, and I was right smack dab in front of it. And so I submitted my 2 weeks and did not know what I was going to do with my life. I had no money saved. I was laying on my couch, you know, just in an emotional wreck. And two things happened after about a month of me doing nothing. One was this project that I worked on, this in Brazil, the Valongo Wharf, which I think you guys have one of the readings is about, was featured on the cover of Landscape Architecture magazine, which is the article tonight.
I remember that when it came out. I was like, wow, that's cool.
Okay, so yeah, that's what was going on in my life when that happened. But so basically, I was just, you know, the title of the article is like, Sara Zewde designs a way forward for memorials everywhere. And I was like, wait, that's me. You know, I guess, and it really made me start to ask, like, maybe I have something to contribute. Maybe I can do something. I don't know. It really just changed my trajectory. I was looking for another job, you know, and when I saw that article, I started to ask myself some questions about what might be possible.
I'm associated with that name.
Sorry?
I'm associated with that name. It's like, who is that famous person?
Yes, exactly. I'm reading about this other landscape architect who's about to change the world, and I'm like, oh, they're talking about me. And then I get a phone call from somebody who would go on to be a client later, and they called and they were like, you know, we really like the work that your firm does. And I was like, my firm? And I was like asking to make sure that it wasn't the firm I was working for before. I was like, what do you mean by my firm? They're like, your firm. Don't you guys do great work? I was like,
Well,
right. Definitely my firm does amazing work. And I got off the phone with her and Googled how to start a business. And I don't know, here we are. We're designing and building projects all over the country. There's 5 of us now. And yeah, just kind of figuring things out as we go. That's the short version of, I guess, how I got here. I'm happy to go into more detail about any aspect of that or share some projects or whatever is interesting to you guys.
If I could just ask for a few more details about the timeline, like when was this and how long has this been that you've been doing your own thing? And then maybe like, how did you start to get projects other than the one that you said, you know, the person who said, well, you do, your company does great work.
So this isn't going to be posted, right, publicly?
No, just on Blackboard.
Okay. For the other students, because you guys are getting like the unplugged version of the story. Basically, I was working at GGN 2000. This is like March 2018.
Okay.
But I've been doing independent projects, just moonlighting, for about 10 years. So since I graduated from MIT in 2010. So a lot of what we're doing now is really building on the work that I was doing independently. And then, you know, my day job was obviously very influential in terms of skill building, but working in another person's firm, you're not really exercising your own way of doing things. You're learning their way of doing things. So that's, you know, I wanted to absorb that, but also continue to develop my own individual way of doing things. And that's what the moonlighting offered. And so when I left UGN March 2018, those two things came together. And
So you
yeah,
already had a set of contacts sort of built up and a bit of a network of, oh yeah, she does good work, and it's not GGN, it's you,
right.
basically. And how, if you don't mind my asking, how did you build that? And how did you build the moonlighting part?
So it started really with a couple of things, I guess. One was my thesis project at MIT, which was redesigning the space underneath the freeway in the Treme neighborhood, which is a historically black neighborhood in New Orleans.
Yeah, Diane Allen Jones showed us some of that stuff. I guess
Oh yeah?
it's sort of it's the same. Is that the same thing?
Well, my work predates that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So she
but
built on what you did. How cool is that?
I mean, I don't know how much you referenced what I did, but I mean, I've been following her work. She more influences me than I probably influence her. So there was some consulting that I did after that, and then there was a project. I was working for a small office in Houston. You know, they really were just doing medians and parking lots and really just this stuff of everyday life. And actually, maybe this is a place where I could example project, because what happened with this project was they were just commissioned to do a regular streetscape, and I basically on my own time asked if I could develop some ideas that I had for the streetscape
How cool.
pro bono.
Okay, so
And
I don't know if you've done this on Blackboard or not before, but if you go to the little purple tab in the bottom right and click on that, and then you go to the little gear that says My Settings.
Okay.
Then you can click, oh, so I'm sorry, I take that back. Click on the square with the right-hand turn arrow. It says Share Content, and then go to Share Application Screen. It's the second one down.
Okay.
And then you'll get a little window that comes up, and you have to click on that window and then click on Share in the bottom right-hand corner of that window, and then click on what you really want to share. Because right now all we're seeing is the infinity thing. There you go, Genesee Street.
Okay.
We can see it. Cool.
So
I have to say, you're the first person who's been able to figure it out that easily. Everyone.
Oh, really?
So good for you.
So this is the project I was just talking about. This is a neighborhood called Freedmanstown in Houston that was built by people who just been free following emancipation, and they built this neighborhood. And at the time, they basically traveled along the Brazos River from the cotton plantations to settle a portion of Buffalo Bayou that hadn't been settled because it was prone to flooding. There's really just thick, dense bayou vegetation, very clayey soils. And so this plot of land that I'm talking about. So they came this direction, and you see how close it is to downtown Houston back then, even back then, but because of its conditions, it was just not developed. So they cleared it. They made their own bricks to pave their own streets. They built their own sewer system, their own schools, everything. The city of Houston wasn't going to do any of this for them. They did the rest of the city. Part of the way that they built the neighborhood was they left some of the lots undeveloped so that, but this is by design, so that they could hold some of the water that, and to basically mitigate flooding, filter the water. And the other thing they did with these undeveloped lots was they took brush from the bayou and built these brush arbors so that these lots could not only help with urban stormwater management, but also function as a space of fellowship and gathering. So this neighborhood basically became the heart of civic Black Houston, and it was home to teachers and shop owners and lawyers and doctors. and ever since then, it's fallen victim to what a lot of historic urban communities, Black communities specifically, have endured. Among them, it's urban renewal, removing housing in order to build public housing. They built a freeway bisecting the neighborhood, and then more recently, the fact that this neighborhood is so close to downtown, which you can see in this image, a lot of development pressure. So the neighborhood and those original structures that they built have been coming down. And so this, at the time, as I mentioned, I was working for this small firm, and they were hired by a civil engineering firm that had been commissioned by the city to design this streetscape. This was as part of it. They had to rip up the street to upgrade the sewer system. And so when they hired the landscape architects, they thought they were hiring landscape architects to do what people think landscape architects do, which is tell them where to put the trees. Where is the curb lines? The tree is going to be 30 foot on center. And they were like, oh, maybe you could put a plaque or some kind of like African symbols in the paving, told us. And so this is the part where I asked my boss, I understand we have to do a streetscape, but I feel like there's more we could do in terms of the history. So what I did was I started to look at the architecture that they built at Freedmantown, and I found that you could trace it back to West Africa, the Yoruba, which is in present-day Nigeria. So they took that architecture, and when people were enslaved and brought to Haiti, they brought it to Haiti. And during the Haitian Revolution in the late 1700s, there was a really bloody revolution, and people fled Haiti, which was a French colony, and moved to Louisiana, which was a French colony. They brought that architecture to New Orleans, and then it spread through the bayous of Southeast Texas, which is why we see it in Freedmantown. And so one of the things that's interesting about this architectural type is that the short end of the home is facing the street. So that means you get a higher number, a higher density of street fronts on the street, makes the street this really active social space. And then the porch as an architectural feature is also nothing. You don't find it in European architecture. It is something that comes from African architecture, and the space that's created, this kind of like gallery of spaces that's created by the porches and the windows and doors, really become the heart of the community when people talk about their memories of this place. So I was really interested with the fact that like this kind of ubiquity of the porch and the alignment of the street fronts, like what impact that had on the culture. And so I started to like document the structures that still exist, because they're being torn down every day. And I wanted to, just take a look at the patterns created by the porches and the windows and doors. The other thing I found was looking at the paving pattern that the original settlers laid. These are the original bricks. The elders in the community talked about how the bricks in the straightaway are all orthogonal, but then when you get to the intersections, they break and they form this diagonal. And they said that they did this specifically to mark the intersection as a place of ritual, and that this was something that was brought from West Africa. So in the streetscape design, I pushed for them to concentrate the bricks that were salvageable and place them in the intersections to kind of honor that tradition of marking the intersections as a space of ritual. And then this school, they wanted a site wall here. So instead of just doing a regular site wall, what I proposed was kind of taking the essential dimensions of that like shotgun interface with the street, and creating this kind of effect where we can tell the story of the architecture, tell the story of the original settlers here. So I was modeling, like in V-Ray, the patterns that the cutout windows and doors would cast on the street. And I also proposed forming the concrete with the original wood paneling from the structures, so that this wall or these panels would be kind of an imprint of the grain from the original structures. And then the planting also was all about recalling the bayou vegetation that the original settlers cleared, and then instead of just picking benches, off the shelf, I proposed integrating the seating into the way that the wall was working to tell the story of those porches. And, you know, instead of writing all of this history on a plaque, we actually are kind of prompting the kinds of interactions that the original architecture was supportive of, and is a different way to tell the story of this neighborhood. When
Brilliant,
okay,
Sarah. It's just brilliant. I just love it. It's so good.
oh, thank you. So when the school district saw what we were up to, they offered a part of their property to include in this concept design. So, you know, because of this legacy of urban stormwater management that the original settlers embedded in their design of the neighborhood, I was really hoping that we could explore removing the curbs on the street and doing bioswales, recalling basically the system that they set up originally, but the Public Works Department wasn't having it. But when the school district approached us, knowing that this is private property, we thought, okay, here's a chance for us to explore that. So here we were proposing a curbless street profile, lots for holding water, but also, again, speaking back to that history of the brush arbors, that we could actually create a space of gathering there too. So a lot of people have been displaced from the neighborhood, and this is having this kind of brush arbor would be a place for, you know, church events to happen here, places where people can come that don't live there anymore but have a connection to the neighborhood. So, you know, even the lighting being a way to kind of enliven and activate this place. So, you know, I mean, the thing about this project is, like, it's a small project, it's a streetscape project. It's all of the regular elements of a landscape project: vegetation, hardscape, drainage, you know, site walls, lighting. But then how do you take each element and tell a story with it? This is something that is a big part of what I'm interested in doing. And doing this project outside of the scope of work we were assigned to in the office was kind of really the first time that I flexed my design muscles on my own. You know what I mean?
Well, you did it in a very beautiful way. It feels so authentic and almost like these beautiful historic echoes and or something, you know, like just taking all these beautiful cultural elements and being able to make them real, and you know, it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer. I was like, I don't want to do a presentation per se. I feel like if there are questions, like the fact that that question kind of prompted me to that project, I'm happy to share more projects as they relate to people's interests. If you guys want to see more projects or just want me to talk more, I'm happy to do either.
How about it, class? Do you all have anything in particular that you'd like to hear about from Sarah, or have questions? Or I have a few questions. If they don't,
Yeah, I can't think of any right now.
okay. So Sarah, in some ways, you've just given a beautiful example and question to, or answer to one of the, or several of the questions that I had sort of prepped for this little conversation. So it's almost like going backwards, but that's okay, because I'm there are things that you'd like to add to it. So I just wanted to, for the sake of those who've not had a chance to read your bio yet, one of the things that just jumped off the page at me was how you stated that the discipline of landscape architecture is tightly bound by precedents and typologies rooted in specific traditions that must be challenged. Love that as just a general statement altogether, but especially like in terms of, oh, well, you know, you just tell us where the trees go. They go 30 feet apart because that's what the zoning ordinance says. But then you say that that without some kind of rigorous investigation, these cultural assumptions will silently continue to constrict the practice of design and reinforce a quiet cultural hegemony in the built form of cities and landscapes. So we'll just continue to get these. Well, you just put in the same tree that you put on every side, and you put them 30 feet apart, and they have to have a curb, and you have to have this, and you have to have that, and that's just what we do. It's what we always do.
Right.
So, and I guess I've never used the word hegemony in a sentence, but I'm guessing that's kind of like this sort of like set way to do things. So,
Yeah, it's like that's yeah, the word is generally used to describe world orders, I guess.
okay.
Probably less design traditions, but I was conscious in the use of that term because I do feel like it's, yeah, the way that we think about and are taught and are teaching landscapes and landscape architecture is really like typology based. A park looks like this, a plaza does this, you know, a cemetery does this, but all of those typologies are very rooted in a very narrow set of cultural traditions, you know, and landscape architecture itself is also, you know, is rooted in a very specific history. That doesn't actually call to my attention. Maybe it makes me think maybe I should present a little bit about my research about Olmsted and his relationship to the South. With
Please.
that, okay.
That sounds wonderful.
Talking about the formation of the discipline, I'm writing a book right now about this part of Olmsted's biography that I think is under historicized when we talk about the founding of our field. Olmsted was woke, and they don't want to tell y'all this, so I'm gonna tell y'all that Olmsted was on one. I really want to make t-shirts that say Olmsted was woke. Okay, so, and this is relevant to North Carolina, actually. So Olmsted, when he was 31, he was hired by the New York Times, it was then called the New York Daily Times, to travel the South and write about the conditions of slavery. And, you know, I think
know that.
I didn't either, which is
Oh
why
my.
I had embarked on this journey. The way that we historicize Olmsted's biography is that, you know, people talk about his early life being a journalist and his later years becoming a landscape architect. So this is graphic that you see here is a summary of his work as a journalist. And then we talk about the history of landscape architecture, kind of starting with Central Park and Olmsted's design competition submission to Central Park. And the
Sarah,
fact that
could you enlarge that a little, please?
let's see.
I mean, I'm seeing that there's writing there, but I'm not really seeing what it's saying at all. Yeah, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
So yeah, so this is how we talk about the founding of the profession, that there's this advocacy for a large park. Olmsted wins the design competition. He oversees the construction and goes on to start a firm and work all across North America, gifting us all with these parks. And so what I'm asserting with my book is we can't talk about these two aspects of his biography as subsequent to one another, because when we look at them chronologically, he's actually going back and forth between his writing on abolition and his work as a landscape architect. So, for instance, he actually, if you see 1861, January 22nd, he submits his resignation to Central Park Commission, and 3 weeks later, he's rewriting what he wrote in the New York Times to compile it into a singular volume called The Cotton Kingdom. And it's his most staunchly abolitionist version of his writing. This is in the midst of Abraham Lincoln's election and inauguration and the South seceding. He's basically, Olmsted in his letters is saying, I know the South is about to secede. We're probably going to go to war. I want to make sure that my thoughts on the abolition of slavery are clear. And so I'm stepping down from my role at Central to rewrite my thoughts. So my book is called Cotton Kingdom Now, and it's revisiting this and trying to say this is actually where our field, our discipline starts on the plantation in the South, because it's his time spent in the South and thinking about American society that after that, he comes back to New York and says, civicness and civic ground is the only way we're going to come together after slavery. So this is the extent of his travels in the South. So Fayetteville. Wait, Martrell, did you say from Fayetteville?
I did.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Also came to Fayetteville, so you can read about it in his book. But I retraced his steps for 4 months last year, and you know, like I said, I'm from Houston, New Orleans, and Houston, so I basically started in DC and drove home. But even the map that you see in the back, this is a drawing that he made, and he used 1860 census data to make this map. So, you know, this kind of like GIS spatial analysis stuff that we're taught today is not new. Olmsted was doing this in 1860. And basically what he wanted to make with this map, or say with this map, is he wanted to challenge the economic argument for slavery. So what he's doing here with the hatches and things is he's showing that in the places with the largest concentration of enslaved people is actually the poorest regions in America. And so he's saying, you know, that there's a few people that are making a lot of money, but in terms of the economic health and wealth of a region, slavery is not good. And he wanted to challenge the fact that it was necessary, that, you know, beyond a moral argument, that economically it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And that's actually the exact same argument of the whole equity movement now, right? It's like,
Exactly.
you know, or it's like universal design. It's like, well, of course, if you provide opportunities for everyone, it will be better off for everyone. You know, it's like, it just makes sense, regardless of what the moral issue, you know, your moral stance on Black Lives Matter or whatever. It's like, we need to make these investments in our communities so that everybody can succeed. You know, sorry,
Absolutely.
I'll get off my soapbox and let you get back on yours.
No, that's exactly right. And the way that Olmsted defines economic health and wealth is ecological. He's talking about the ramifications on the soil of this kind of short-term extractive way of that honestly, that owning people basically pulls you towards. He's talking about culture and the fact that arts and culture and the idea of civic society is corroded by the fact that you own people. That it basically, it skews your ego and your sense of being a part of a community because you're obsessed with the idea of owning others. And he talks about the innovation, and he's like, why is the South not innovating? Because they live in this false world where labor is free, you know. And so he just goes into all these, makes all these points into how, you know, in terms of dollars and cents and beyond, that it doesn't make sense. And he uses this map to do that.
I'm blown away by this. I can't believe I didn't know all this, and I can't wait for your book to come out.
So what I found when I retraced his steps was that a lot of the physical conditions of what he saw have changed drastically, but the economic and social conditions that he witnessed are still there. They're still very much the same way he describes. And so it's interesting to note why the physical conditions aren't the same. And in many cases, it's landscape architecture that is the tool for recasting or, you know, covering over or obscuring the history that was there. And so the tools and the profession that Olmsted advocated for now are like the weapon to untell the story that he wanted to tell about America. And so to me, it really puts a light on landscape architecture now. Like, this is actually what he wanted this profession to be about. Like, he felt like after abolition, we need places to come together as people. And our discipline has not historicized that properly. This is my assertion. And it calls attention today to what's possible.
You know what else is just so amazing about this, Sarah, is that aren't we just exactly in the same place with our country divided in half, and at least or almost half of us saying we just need to get back to the way things used to be. make it great again the way it used to be when when we were, I don't know, it's just craziness. And it's like, and it's the same, could potentially be the same argument. Where are we going to come together? How are we going to come together if not in some public places where we can have some kind of good discourse instead of just, throwing insults at one another or something.
Exactly.
Wow. This is so amazingly relevant. I can't believe it's so good. It gives me so much hope.
Martrell, any thoughts? I'm gonna keep calling on you because you have a camera on, and this is for y'all.
I have a question.
Okay.
I can turn my camera on. Sure. Um, do you think we can use landscape
Hi, Roman.
architecture? Oh, hello. Do you think we can use landscape architecture to expand different cultures that we can take influences from to adjust our agriculture system so that it's not so just based? Like how,
Absolutely.
like for example, how native cultures like the Aztecs and or Mayans used to grow food, but they would actually build
Mm.
these things in rivers. So it would just be like little plots of land and rivers surrounded by water and all that instead of just a dry, barren field that we have to like spend thousands of dollars bringing water towards.
Roman, I think you know the answer to that question.
I don't know if you can do it today. Well, in your opinion, since you've been around the world so much.
Um, 1,000%. And that's actually, the quote that your professor just shared about what I was saying, that our profession is so narrow in our traditions. That's exactly why, is because we're not mining other traditions besides European ones about how to do things. And that's what Olmsted actually was very critical about. Olmsted is a farmer, first and foremost. And so he's actually very interested in agricultural traditions. And in the writing, he actually puts enslaved people as the protagonists of the landscape. Like, he's like, basically, the slave owners know nothing about how to grow anything. And so he spends most of his time talking to enslaved people and asking them about the working with the land. And I mean, a lot of people default to Native American traditions of the landscape, but in reality, there's a lot of African agricultural practices that were brought to the Americas. And so most of what we see in the landscape in the South is actually a function of African agricultural traditions. This is most relevant, I would say, in the Low Country in South Carolina, where, you see a lot of rice. It was that didn't even exist. That is a technology that was specifically brought from West Africa and brought to the Americas. And actually, I can maybe share. Maybe this is a good place to actually share. But another kind of project that I did that uses this idea, and how do we actually what is the process of interpreting other traditions and making them contemporary, which I think is the heart of the question, right?
Can I share one thing, Sarah?
Yeah.
My wife is a botanist, and she teaches a class most semesters on plants and people. And she has a whole lecture on rice, and several of the slides show all these ornate hair ways that women did their hair, so that they could hide the rice inside their hair when they were put on the slave ships, so that when they
Wow.
got them, they had all these different seeds, not just rice, but other kinds of things too, yams, I don't know, just different kinds of things that they knew that they could plant when they got to wherever they were going. So most of the strains of rice that were grown were from Africa, from the Niger Delta in Mali in West Africa. So and I had one other thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's one other thing I want to talk about with you, Roman, and that is Jordan Lake, because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and figure out how to get all the algae out of Jordan Lake, which is the major drinking water supply for the city of Raleigh. And they're creating these floating islands that basically pump the water out of the bottom of the lake to aerate it. But a much better way to do it would be to create floating platforms to grow food on. And that would be like such a cool senior project for you.
Okay, cool. That's great, actually. Low tech.
Yeah, I mean, the question you asked is a minefield in a sense. Like, I think that's the future, basically, of landscape architecture, is how do we break out of all of the traditions that we think are the ones to, I mean, the reality is the way that we've been building things in the United States, which is rooted in European tradition, is just not long-term, is just not resilient.
Yeah.
Not. And it wasn't built to be either. It was about money now. And not about a long ancestral relationship to the land. So if you want, I can share an example, another project example that's maybe relevant to this idea. Okay, so this is in Brazil, which you may or may not know is the largest concentration of Black people outside of Africa, which I didn't know until I moved to Brazil. This is a painting from 1835 called Desembarque, which means arrival. And this is 22% of all enslaved people that were brought to the Americas traveled through Brazil. And so for millions of them, that was through Rio de Janeiro. And this is the spot where they landed in Rio. So this jetty where they landed, where their feet first touched the continent of the Americas, was covered over after abolition, and so it was just a regular street. And then the construction crews, when they were preparing for the Olympics and the World Cup, accidentally found this jetty perfectly preserved below the street. And so I got involved in the design of a memorial there. And the idea of a memorial is another one of those things, just like agricultural practices. Memorials and designing for memory is very rooted in European traditions, which is like basically classical antiquity, classical notions of monumentality. The idea that the past is a discrete moment in time, and it should be like an object on a pedestal or a statue or a wall with names on it, but something that's outside of everyday life, that's rooted in a very specific tradition. So I wanted to break away from the European tradition of memorial, and I started figuring out what that might mean by mapping the continents over 300 million years. This will make sense later. So this black dot is where that jetty is. And so if you look at 300 million years ago, it actually was part of this, it touched the southwest coast of Africa. And it actually, because of that, it has a similar soil profile. It has this latisolic tropical red soils. Even today, they share that. And so this next drawing, it shows the dominant slave trade routes and dominant ocean currents. And basically what happened was enslaved people brought the seeds of plants that were really important to them, either in terms of food culture or spirituality or medicinal uses. And because of this history of the soils being shared, those plants hybridized and flourished in the Americas. So North Carolina's over here somewhere. That must be North Carolina right there. And then you see these ocean currents. Basically what that speaks to is some of these seeds made the same journey as the Africans, but they landed in the Americas before the Africans. And so when the Africans arrived here, when they saw some of those coastal plant species, the story is they knew that their gods were present. So if you zoom into this dot, that's where that jetty is. So this is a drawing of basically what the Africans would have seen when they arrived in the jetty, and they would have seen those coastal species for the first time. If they were dead on arrival, they were taken to this open burial ground, and that was it. If they were sick on arrival, they were taken to a slave hospital to get better before their sale. If they were able to get free, they would form like free communities on the hilltops. Otherwise, they would be taken down this narrow street into what's called the deposit, this plaza. And they were fattened and tamed for 2 to 4 weeks before they were taken to like one of these small plazas for their sale. And so, you know, basically what this shows is like the scale of infrastructure you need to buy and sell and ship millions of humans is like you need to build a city. And that's how most of our cities were built in the Americas. So I took that historical analysis and compared that to the city today, and I found that a lot of those places are still there, but there's no marker. And then I looked at which properties the city owns. So I went to the mayor's office and said, okay, forget a memorial like an object on a pedestal. Like we need to talk about this is the scale of the memorial. So ultimately, this is kind of like the short version of this story, but basically I gave them a master plan of a series of different projects inserted into the city. And all of them were using plants that the Africans brought with them. I won't. Okay, so maybe I can give a. I know we're running out of time, but here's an example of one of those designs. So at the actual archaeological site, there's an obelisk, and this obelisk is meant to honor the Portuguese empress. And so it's kind of like having like a Confederate monument on top of a slave site. So the activists in the neighborhood were like, you know, can you? Well, they wanted to remove it, but the city said no. And so they asked me if I could design something that was like taller than the obelisk so that we could win or something. But what I offered instead was to say, what if we mine Afro-Brazilian traditions of power instead of trying to like enter into the conversation about height as a demonstration of power, which is in this context a European tradition. So that brought us to the ficus genus, which is a genus that is native to both continents because of its history. And the base of the tree is where they believe, Afro-Brazilians and Africans believe, that the ancestors gather. And they mark that with a wrapping of white fabric or white walls at the base. So we designed this basically circulation system around the archaeological site that looks like a wrap, and has ficus trees to basically recall the ancestors. I can maybe show one more. This site right here is basically what would have been the last few feet of the African journey to the jetty. And right now the city owns it. And there's a lot of traditions that are tied to the sea, but the bay is really polluted and dangerous to touch. So I designed this plaza that has a skim of water that activates some traditions at the sea, and also is kind of a microclimate place to play for kids. So it's like not a memorial like a somber one, but it's one where every day and history come together. I'll just kind of skim through these. But, you know, originally the city government was saying we could not plant these Afro-Brazilian plant species because they're non-native. Now, what we said was, okay, the idea of plants being native is based on which plants were there when the Europeans arrived, which is an arbitrary moment in the constant migration of plants and humans. And so, you know, we should really look at each species and see how it actually operates in this context instead of just throwing them all away because native, non-native, that's not really a useful construct when we're talking about, you know, cultural values, and you know, and we can think about ecological health in a more nuanced way as opposed to this kind of random idea of nativity. So, I mean, the conversation about how do you pull from other cultures made me think of this project because it's very much about pulling from another tradition of a memorial and also challenging the idea of nativity.
It's wonderful. Your work is so inspiring, Sarah. and your level of creativity in expanding the boundaries of what's possible and how we should be practicing is so inspiring. Makes me want to take one of your classes.
Roman, was that interesting at all?
Very interesting. Thank you.
Well, if y'all want to come and like watch our final review for my class, it's a seminar, it's not a studio, but they have to make drawings, and each one of them was assigned a different site that Olmsted visited in the South, and they have to research what's happened since Olmsted went 165 years ago and what's happened today, and tell that tell that story through drawing. So you all are invited to, if you want to see, what do we have in North
Love to.
Carolina? I forget what sites we have in North
Maybe one in Fayetteville?
Carolina. I don't think we did Fayetteville this time. I think we did Raleigh-Durham last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those in North Carolina, those houses that you were showing, we call shotgun houses.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're
It's
very
from the African word shogun. That's why we call them.
fantastic. I did not know where that came from. That's great. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, there's a lot of those in eastern Raleigh, East Raleigh, which is where I used to work 30 years ago when I first got out of school. So it was like going back home to see all those kids. Is there a way that you could share the time and date and
Yes.
and then maybe how we would access your what did you call it? Your final presentations or whatever?
Yeah. Can you?
I don't know if is there a chat on this? I'm so used to Zoom that I'm not. Oh yeah, there's a little bubble. A bubble. If you hit the purple thing, there's a bubble, and that's the chat thing.
Okay.
Do you offer internships by chance?
I do. Okay, I'll put our where you submit your applications for us.
Okay.
You'll see in the chat.
I do.
Jobs at studio-zewde.com.
Mhm.
Cool.
I have to run, unfortunately, to my next thing.
This has been so valuable and so inspiring, Sarah, for you to share this. Will you send me an email with the information about your
Yes.
final presentations? Okay, great.
Now, will y'all come?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay.
I'll be there.
Roman's in. Motrell. Jasmine, you're in?
I am.
Okay. Cedric, is he still with us?
He should be.
David? Okay, well, I wish you all luck in your journeys, and maybe we'll see you December 2nd. But otherwise, I hope to see you out in these landscape architecture streets.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been
All
really
right.
good to be with you.
Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.
Bye.
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 She's
I
What
like
do y'all
her.
think?
I like her.
Yes.
Any thoughts or comments or?
It's a lot.
Exactly, Roman.
It was a lot.
It was very enjoyable, honestly. The connecting, culture and everything. Lit class, lit lecture, LL, you know.
Yeah, good. Well, I was really excited when she said yes. She was like, I am sorry, I am too busy. There's no way I can do this. I'm like, well, I certainly understand. It just would be lovely if you could do it. And she said, well, the best I could do is if I could do it at the very end of the semester. What about, November 17th? I'm like, yes, absolutely. So we were lucky to get her because she's obviously a very busy woman running her own firm and teaching at Harvard and writing a book and who knows what else. sure is inspiring though to see somebody that just has such a clarity about what she's doing and how she wants to impact the world. And I have, I'm really looking forward to seeing how each of you uh, will impact the world in similar beautiful ways. So you all need to stay in touch with our program so we can see where your journey takes you. And if there's anything that we can do to help with that, please feel free to ask. You know, if you need a letter of recommendation or you need some help trying to figure out how to touch base. Martrell, I guess you heard she has a professor that has a connection to Disney, so I would follow up with her and say, so you said that. Could you please connect me to this and see, you know, I think that'd be a great first start. I mean, you know, using Sara Zewde's name would probably not hurt at all, you know, to say, hey, yeah, I got your connection from, you know, a guest lecture from Sara. So if that's something that you're at all interested in, I'd jump on it and say, where might this take me? I love that part where she said, you know, she had no idea what she was going to do. She just hit a brick wall and it was like she couldn't go on anymore working 70 hours a week. And then the next thing she knows, these things are dropping into her lap. And, you know, and part of that is because of all of her hard work, you know, building all those connections and doing such amazing work too. But I mean, you know, that could easily be you all as well. So don't sell yourselves short. You need to think, you need to dream big and think about the ways that you can impact the world, because we really need you. The world, our country and our world need people like you who are educated and who can change things, right? Make it better. Okay, thank you all for being with me, being with Sara. It was great to be with you all. And if you have any questions about how we're proceeding, just feel free to ask me. But my general thought is if you can just, you know, write your last few summaries from the speakers that we've had for the second half of the semester, and then either, you know, I mean, you can do it any way you like, but the way that I've sort of given you at least an opportunity is to think about it in terms of what are the key lessons that you've kind of learned from all these people throughout the semester, and how might you apply those to your own journey of moving forward from graduation towards seeing kind of where life takes you next, okay? And how you can make some choices based on some of those life lessons that other people have shared with us. Okay, thank you
I
all.
have one last question.
Yes, sir.
Do you have her email?
I do. Hold on just a second. Let me look it up. Sorry, it's freezing on me. Dang.
She said they do internships also.
Yeah,
She did. She said that. I heard her.
Looking at it, I'm on a website.
Oh yeah, I don't see the application. You might just have to ask her for it, or it might not be up yet.
All right, that's cool.
You have to go to Harvard.
Wasn't that your question though? It was like, do you have internships? And she said yes.
Yeah, that's what I asked. Yeah.
Okay, here it is. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting the right screen to show up here. There we go. Sara Zewde. It is Sara.Zewde. So SARA.ZEWDE at gmail.com.
Can you spell the last name again?
ZEWDE.
Okay, at Gmail.
And it's on, I'm not 100%, but I believe it's on the stuff that I posted, the bio that I posted of her.
Mhm.
Not 100% on that, but I think it is. Here, I'll just put it up in the chat too, so that it's recorded. Here you go. sara.zewde@gmail.com. Okay, guys, good to be with you.
All right.
Holler if there's something I can do to help you along the way. And look forward to, I can't remember, I guess next week what we're going to do is just kind of do a little bit of a review section. But if you feel inspired to write your paper, you're welcome to write it and turn it in ahead of time. Be happy to grade it ahead of time if you're feeling like you're ready to do that. So in the meantime, I'll try and I'll put together a little kind of a outline like I did for the first half of the semester in terms of some of the things that that I'd like you to sort of list out as far
You're
as
talking about the
lessons.
final paper?
Yes,
Yeah.
And
Okay.
if you look at Learning Unit 15, I've kind of outlined that. Actually, I think I showed that before you got on, David. So let me just real quickly, I'll just share my screen with you so you can see it. So it's Learning Unit 15 down here at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I basically said, look, since most of you are seniors, you've got another semester to go here, this might be a good time for you to think in terms of um, kind of distilling what you've sort of learned from some of your favorite
Speakers.
guests, and how to begin to think about applying that to a job or a career path, or kind of what some of your next steps might be. So it
Okay.
might to try and just sort of help make that a little more relevant for you all, since all of you are kind of entering into this transition time, which is always difficult, when you're trying to move from one thing to the next. You're sort of having to let go of what you know towards and start looking for what you're not sure about what you know. So it's just a challenging time for all of you, I know. So I'm hoping that this will help you kind of think some of your possibilities through, and my hope is that you'll see yourself in a lot of these folks and say, okay, Sara said it. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't know where she was going to go, but she found a way, and doors
Yeah.
open and things happen. So I'm hopeful that you all can see that same kind of um, set of opportunities for yourselves.
That was kind of my big takeaway from this session was her not knowing what to do, but where she ended up anyways.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you all. It's good to be with you. And I'll see you next week at 1 o'clock.
Yep. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.